Alright guys, let's talk some Endgame spoilers. Hey guys, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. So, just going to give you guys a heads up again. This is going to be a spoiler-filled review for Avengers Endgame. So if you haven't seen the film and you are trying to avoid spoilers, definitely don't watch any further. Go check out the film and then come back here and watch this spoiler-filled review. Otherwise, if you're someone that doesn't care about spoilers, feel free to continue watching. But yeah, I want to jump right into this thing. First thing, actually, I want to mention is, as I'm sure you guys have probably seen by now, completely destroying the box office. Last night or yesterday, it did like another 37 million, so it's going to be at like 400 million in the U.S. alone. So I'm really pulling for it. Hope it can beat Avatar at the boxes. That would be pretty cool to see. But as far as the film goes, we'll go ahead and jump right into that. And you can see down below in the description box different chapters of basically what I'm talking about if you want to skip to certain things in the video as well, because this is going to be a long one. So first thing, the film opens up and it actually goes back a little bit, and we get to see what Hawkeye was up to when the events of Infinity War, the end of that was going on, which was that was cool to see. But at the same time, as an audience member, you're like, yep, what's about to happen. And you see Hawkeye there. He's he has his family, a couple kids, his daughter. He's showing her how to shoot arrows. Everything's great for him, and you're just like, yep, what's coming. And sure enough, he goes to say something to his wife and turns around and his daughter's gone, and then he's looking for her and he turns back around, rest of his family's gone. So I thought that was just a really interesting way, and just gave you an idea of what to kind of expect with this film. Definitely a pretty dark start, but I thought it was a great intro, and set up the rest of the film really nicely. After that, we end up getting some of the scenes where you see Tony and Nebula. They're stuck in space, and we get some cool interactions between them. It was just nice to. This movie had a lot of those too. It had a lot of those nice little moments with characters. You see Tony, and he's showing Nebula how to play football, and just little things like that I really appreciated in this film. So that was cool, and some of the details that they put in. You see Tony, and they're up there in space. They've run out of food, running out of oxygen, and you could just see that he looks a little like sickly for from being up there and not having anything left. So that was something that I thought they did a good job of incorporating into the film as well. And so he's basically on the verge of giving up. He thinks he's going to die. So he's getting ready. He records a message for Pepper Potts, and he's getting ready to lay down, and then Captain Marvel ends up saving him and Nebula. So had an idea that was going to happen. That was something that I was a lot of other people, I think, were kind of theorizing was going to happen. She was going to show up and save him, and she does. So that was cool. Bring both of them back down to the Avenger facility, and some emotional scenes. Early on, you get to see Tony reunite with Pepper Potts. You see Nebula with Rocket Raccoon, and they're grieving over losing pretty much everyone in their family. And then you also get that moment where Tony looks at Captain America, and he says he lost the kid, referring to Peter Parker. So some pretty emotional stuff to start this film, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. It's trust me, it gets only worse from there. So as they're in the headquarters, they're one of the things that I like that they incorporated, because even though they had Tony and Captain America had that touching moment there for kind of a second, you do still see that there is definitely some tension still between those characters. Tony's talking about how he lost again, and asking Captain where was he, kind of blaming it on him. Tony saying that he wanted to put a shield around the world, and what would have happened if they would have just done that. So and you kind of forget about that. They really, you had Civil War, and then after that was Infinity War. So these two characters really haven't had a chance to reconcile. So it was good to see that they've kind of they kept that going. And then from there, the rest of the Avengers, they're talking about, going to, Captain Marvel. She mentioned she's going to go find Thanos and, basically try and reverse everything. And so, and it's, again, something I thought that was going to happen probably early on. They were going to try and go, fight Thanos and take care of this, pretty early on in the film and fail. And so they get the coordinates of where he's at. And it was, it was interesting. You end up, they go to outer space and you end up finding out, he's on this planet by himself. He's basically like a farmer now. And for a second, they did a really good job with this. Like, you almost felt bad for him because he's minding his own business right now. I mean, even though he just killed half of the universe, but he's minding his own business and he's basically become like a farmer. And, then the Avengers just come in and, start attacking him. And right away, Thor cuts off his hand with, where the Infinity Gauntlet is. And you're just like, oh, shit. Like, what's going on? And then from there, they realize that the Infinity Stones are not in the glove. And, the glove's fried. You see Thanos' face. It's, it's pretty burned as well. And so something definitely happened. And, they're talking to him and he mentions that he used the Infinity Stones to destroy the Infinity Stones because, his work was done and it was just going to be too much temptation if he kept it. So, our heroes realize they're like, what the hell do we do now? Like they're, the stones are gone, but they think they're, they have to be somewhere. And at that point, Thor then takes, Stormbreaker again, cuts Thanos' head off. And like, it was at that moment, I think, like not only myself, my friends, but the audience, and especially opening night, we were just like, okay, like where do we go from here? That was pretty crazy to start the film off like that. And then from that moment, we end up getting the 5-year gap, which was something that I wasn't expecting. Now, it's at this point, with the 5-year gap that this is kind of, this is all still kind of like the first act. And it's at this point that we kind of get to see the different Avengers, that are still alive, like kind of how their lives have been affected since, what happened 5 years ago. And, so that was really interesting. One of the first things that you get to see, you see, you forgot about Ant-Man, and, he was trapped in the quantum realm, and he gets out. It was kind of convenient how that happened. At the same time, it wasn't, but, there's a rat that runs across, like, the machine and ends up freeing him from the quantum zone, and, so he gets out, and, he quickly realizes, because he's in, like, a warehouse, he's like, what the hell, like, happened, like, and ends up finding out like the wall that's like the monuments that are in the city with all the different people's like names on it. And he starts looking for like his family, realizes that his daughter isn't there, but does see his name on there. So he's like, what the hell's going on? And this was one of the first, besides like the opening with Hawkeye and his family. This is another moment that you're just like, wow, like really packed a punch. When Ant-Man, he ends up going up to his house and knocks on the door, and Cassie, his daughter, ends up coming out, and she's like now like an older teenager, young adult. So 5 years have gone by, and just like that, reunion with those two characters, that was pretty emotional, and definitely felt the impact. I felt the impact as far as like that goes. So great acting from both Paul Rudd and I'm not sure of the girl who plays the older Cassie, but it was just a great scene overall. Something I really enjoyed. We end up going back at that, like I believe, like not too long after that, you end up going back to the Avengers headquarters, and you get an interesting scene with Black Widow and Captain America there. And some nice foreshadowing with what's going to happen with their characters later on in the film. You can tell Black Widow and Natasha, she's a mess, and Captain America, Steve ends up coming in, and they're talking, and he just says something along the lines that, I think you need to get a life, or we need to get a life, and she says, you first, and definitely, if you've seen the film, that definitely ties into, later on, especially with what happens with Cap. So I noticed that, second time around watching this film, there's a lot of different little things that you'll pick up on, a lot of foreshadowing, which was really cool. So it's always great when you get to see a film for the second time, and you can pick up on, different little pieces like that. So that was cool. And it's shortly, not too long after that, you end up seeing the scene in the trailer where Ant-Man shows up outside the headquarters, and so he meets up with Widow and Cap, and he's talking and telling them about the quantum realm. So they're trying to figure out how they can kind of put this together, because they got to take a chance if they got it. And so that's when they go find Tony. And like I said, it's been 5 years. Now Tony's he's married to Pepper Potts, and not only that, but he has a daughter, which he's got everything basically he's ever wanted. And the Avengers, or the couple members of the Avengers, show up, and they're explaining the whole time travel thing and what they want to try and do to basically bring everybody back. And Tony, he's like, I can't do it. I got a family now, and I can't risk losing that, which is definitely something that like personally, like I could totally see where he's coming from. And he's definitely, Tony, he's come a long way. As he started out in the first Iron Man film, he was a very selfish, narcissistic guy. And I mean, to a degree, it still kind of is here, but it's like you could still, at the same time, you can understand where he's coming from, because it's like he's got a family now. It's not just literally about him. So he's got to think about them as well. So that was a nice scene with those characters. And then obviously when he's telling them that he can't help out at the beginning, they go to search for someone else, and that's when we come across Professor Hulk, and they're at this little like diner thing or whatever, and we find out that Bruce and the Hulk have finally decided to stop fighting, and now they are Professor Hulk, which is just something else that I kind of had a prediction going into the film that I thought might happen. So it was cool to see that Hulk is constantly evolved throughout the films, which is good. We've gotten to see different kind of like versions of the character, which is always good. They've pretty much they've kept him fresh throughout the the franchise. So that was funny. Especially the whole like him taking pictures, and then they don't want pictures with Ant-Man, and then like him dabbing and stuff like that. So some great comedic moments, especially with the Hulk, throughout like the film. So at this point, they end up going back to the headquarters with Professor Hulk, and they're gonna try and figure out how to do this whole time travel thing. And we get some funny moments with Ant-Man. He's volunteered to do this because he's the only really one that has experience. And, he goes back and forth. First he's like a teenager, and then he ends up like being like an old man, and then he's like a baby version of himself. So they have no idea what they're doing. And that was, there was some great, comedy with that stuff. And it's interesting. I'd say like a lot of the comedy is definitely like in the like first or like middle part of the movie. But they were able to kind of tie it together nicely. None of it was like really like forced. There was a lot of good stuff there. And then at that point, you get Tony. He ends up, deciding to come and try and help the Avengers out. And we see, he's talking to Cap, and so he's asking if they got like the team together, and they're still working on getting a couple. And that's when, at that point, we end up seeing the Professor Hulk and Rocket. They go to try and find Hulk, and or not Hulk, Thor, sorry. And so they end up going to find Thor, who now is living in New Asgard, which is in this little like sea town. And he's definitely changed. This was another thing that was really unexpected for me. Did not think that they were going to go this direction with Thor. So they find him, and he's really let himself go. Like, he is this fat Thor now. And I know it's funny because a lot of people I've seen like online, a lot of people were pissed off with kind of like what they did with that character choice. But Rocket like refers to him as melted ice cream, which was a great line. But I think it works. I think that it was a good choice because it wasn't just for a joke, even though they do kind of have a running gag throughout the rest of the movie. But on the emotional side of things, he's basically blames himself, because he didn't go for the head in the first place. And, he thinks that this is kind of all his fault. So he's kind of just almost like giving up on things and really just kind of let himself go and doesn't, care or anything. But they do end up getting him to come along after they, offer him some beer that is on the that's going to be on the Milano. So they do get him to finally come along. But yeah, so definitely a choice that was a risk. I think it paid off for me, but it's been kind of split. I've seen with some of you guys out there. Oh, and I think I actually skipped ahead like real quick, but like as far as Tony goes, before he got to the back to the Avengers headquarters, he figures out the whole time travel thing, and he has a really interesting and like one of my favorite scenes in the film. He's in, again, a lot of foreshadowing. He's talking to Pepper Potts and tells her that he's figured it out, and just explains that that he could basically forget about this whole thing, throw the key in the bottom of the lake and forget about it. And she goes, but could you really do that? Would you be able to rest, knowing that? And, that's definitely some foreshadowing with his character, especially like towards the end of the movie. And she had a great line where she mentioned something like, I stopped trying to have you, do things. That's one of my like greatest like failures. So just a really, good conversation. And again, just those like small little moments, those little scenes like that in the beginning of the film, I thought really helped, move the film along, and then it pays off like later in the film. So I think you really needed those. I know some people mentioned that a little bit slower to start off, but I didn't think that was the case at all. I was fascinated by a lot of those scenes, and they really helped pack that emotional impact later on in the film. So I felt that that was definitely something that they did a good job with. As far as and then the only member left that they had to find at this point, they end up tracking down Hawkeye, who is now Ronin, and we get to see a cool scene of him. He's in like Japan or something, I believe. And he's just taking out all these like gang members, and he actually, like the last guy, he ends up slitting his throat, which was something I was a little surprised with, especially where Marvel, it's with Disney, and it's like, how far can they like really go? So I was a little surprised by that, but like some cool moments with Ronin, and then you end up seeing Black Widow. She tracks him down and tells him that they might have a chance to kind of fix things, and he has that that great line where he says, "Don't give me hope." So that kind of wraps up like the first act of the film. They're tracking down all the members to kind of get them back together to try this whole time travel thing, and then we jump into Act 2. Now with Act 2, basically this part of it really focuses on the whole time traveling aspect of the film. So basically the Avengers, they put together a plan of like where the Infinity Stones were in the past, like what's the best time to get them, and so that way they can go ahead and retrieve them before Thanos gets them, and then reverse the snap. So this was definitely, I'll say, one of my favorite parts of the film. For a couple of reasons. One, just the, of course, like the nostalgic factor. It was cool just to kind of revisit some of these films, but then not only just like the nostalgic factor, but it was really cool you get to see some different viewpoints of like certain scenes from some of these films, and that was something that was really cool, and I appreciated. As far as the first stone goes, you have Tony, Ant-Man, and Captain America. They go back to the events of the first Avengers film, with Loki like getting arrested and stuff like that, and they're trying to track down that stone. There's some great scenes in there. You get the whole thing with like Ant-Man. He makes the joke of, because Tony's talking about that Captain America's suit isn't too flattering. And, Ant-Man, he's a huge Captain America fan, so he says, something along the lines of, oh, that, I think you look great, Cap, that's America's ass. And that was one of the funniest lines in the film, and they end up kind of revisiting that a couple scenes like later. So you get that, some great comedy. You also there was at a point where Cap's like going in like the elevator, and, you see, the guy who played Crossbones, and Cap's trying to get the scepter, and he's like, oh yeah, I got clearance from like the secretary or whatever, so you guys can go ahead and give that over. And they don't believe him, obviously. And then they're like, oh, I'm gonna have to call like the secretary, and Cap goes, oh no, that's okay. and just leans in and says, "Hail Hydra." And that was, as far as like big nerd moments, I was to say, when I saw the film for the first time, that was definitely one of them that got one of the biggest reactions out of the crowd to start it off with. People absolutely love that. We also get Captain America versus Captain America, which that was, cool to see. Just, seeing how Cap's evolved over the years. And he also kind of makes fun of himself because at one point the older Cap says, "Oh, I can do this all day." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So some really funny jokes in that first part where they go back to, that part of the film. We also end up seeing, kind of when they're starting to like wrap that up, that, Loki ends up getting the Tesseract because they kind of fumble it after the Hulk smashes open the door and like the Tesseract, goes flying. So he gets the Tesseract, so they kind of screw things up with that, and then you see Loki disappear, which I think is definitely going to be setting up Loki's TV show that's going to be on Disney Plus. So again, it was cool to see some of different viewpoints of like the first Avengers film. So that was like the first movie that they go back to. So after that, we end up getting Thor and Rocket. They go to the events of Thor 2: The Dark World. And we get to see Thor, reignite with his mother. So that's a pretty emotional scene. She knows that he's from the future, and she has like a line where she says like, "Oh, I can tell that the future hasn't been too kind to you." And I know some people got emotional over that, and that was also the day that she died. So Thor was emotional. He's kind of a mess in this film, and he's trying to work through different things. So again, I think that's why the whole Fat Thor thing I thought was a good choice, because you can definitely tell that he's just he's been through a lot, and it wouldn't be like reasonable, I guess, in like my mind, if he was just to kind of push through things and it's like, "Oh yeah, like I'm fine." He's dealt with a lot like in his past, so it's cool to kind of see this development for the character, I think, like in my mind. One of the other like we also have another epic moment when they're on Asgard, and that's when Thor ends up getting his hammer back. And like at first I was like, "Oh, like what's going on?" And then you see the hammer come back, and again, crowd absolutely love that. That was really cool. But one little thing I thought about like afterwards, I was like, man, so at one point when he ends up taking that that hammer to the future, there's the Thor from back then that's probably like, "Where the hell's my hammer?" So and like I mentioned that to like a few of my other friends, like said that as well. So something I thought about like afterwards that I thought was just kind of funny. And then we also end up having Black Widow and Ronan. They end up going to Vormir. And this was, you knew what happened with, Infinity War, where, Thanos and Gamora were there, and obviously he ended up killing Gamora to get the Soul Stone. And so you had a feeling someone was going to die here. And I honestly thought that it was going to be, Hawkeye. I thought that, they had brought him back and were probably going to wrap up his, like, story. And, his family was gone. So I thought, he was probably going to be the one to go. And they have, at one point, they're pretty much trying to see who can, like, kill themselves, like, first. And they're, they try to, like, save each other. But I was really surprised. So they, like, end up, like, jumping over. And, but Black Widow makes it so that way, Hawkeye, he throws the thing onto the ledge, and so he's hanging there trying to hold her, but he realizes obviously that he can't pull both of them up, and she has like a she says something along the lines of like you can let me go, like it's okay, and he starts crying, and that was the first part in the film that I started crying, and I know I could hear like at that point it was pretty quiet, so you can hear the snivels, and other people in the film were crying too, so wasn't expecting that. And you also get the you see Black Widow down there at the bottom, and she's dead, and you can see like the blood from the back of her head. So that was a pretty impactful, emotional moment, something I wasn't expecting. I thought Black Widow was probably one of the people that I thought had a pretty good chance of like making this film, so I was surprised with that. And obviously now we know that her film is most likely going to be a prequel, when that comes out. After that, we end up we get to see Nebula and War Machine, Rhodey, end up going to Morag, and they get to revisit the events of Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, which I was really excited about. Like, I knew what was about to happen once they got there. Just because the first Guardians was like one of my favorite, MCU films, but also just like one of my like favorite films of all time. I watched that so many times, so it was exciting to see them back there. She does, like Nebula mentions that they got to be careful though, because like they're not the only ones that are looking for the stones in that time period. Mentioning like Thanos and her sister and stuff like that. But there's a really funny scene where they're waiting for Quill to show up, and you see Quill from what we saw in like the viewpoint of like the original film, but then you also get to see Nebula and Rhodey's like viewpoint as well, and so he's just kind of singing. The music kind of cuts out, and he's just kind of singing to himself, and he looks over to Nebula, and he's just like, "He's a dumbass, isn't he?" and something like that, and she's just like, "Yeah." And that was funny. Like, everyone like burst out laughing at that scene. So that was pretty cool. They're getting ready to leave, and then all of a sudden Nebula like short circuits or whatever, and definitely I was not expecting this, and all of a sudden somehow like her consciousness or whatever connects with the past Nebula, and we see Nebula on the ship with her father, and Gamora is on there, and it's at that point that basically Thanos kind of figures out. He ends up putting the pieces together of what's going on, and he ends up getting the footage from like future Nebula, and seeing that basically the Avengers are trying to go back and get the Infinity Stones to reverse what he ends up doing in the future. So it's at that point you realize, you're like, oh shit, like it's about to go down. Like old Thanos is about to come into the future and take the fight to the Avengers, and that's something that they don't even realize. So you're like, okay, like it's definitely starting to rack it up at this point. One of the other things too, before kind of wrapping up like the time travel part of it, you end up having Tony and Steve go to the 70s, because where they blew the chance of getting the Tesseract during the Avengers like scene. So they end up going back there, and you get Tony gets to, and he ends up meeting his dad from back then. And they have, like a really nice talk, and, like his dad's talking about like, oh man, I really hope that like my son doesn't end up like me. And some really, touching moments there with Tony. And then also he doesn't get to meet him, but you see like, Steve talks to young Hank Pym, and nice little Easter egg in there. I'm sure a lot of you guys, if you're big comic book fans, noticed the original Ant-Man helmet was in the lab. So that was cool to see. But that whole sequence, I'd say that the highlight of that was definitely, Tony talking to his dad. And then you also get Steve. He goes into the office of Peggy Carter, and you see that picture from the first Captain America film is sitting on her desk. So that definitely some pretty emotional moments in that time travel sequence. Oh, and the last time travel thing that I want to go over too is just that you have Professor Hulk, who ends up going to talk to the Ancient One, which this is during the events of the first Avengers 2012. So it was cool to see that, again, that perspective, and she was there while that was going on, and he's like, oh, I gotta grab that, and she at first won't let him, and he kind of explains like that Doctor Strange ended up giving the stone over, and she realizes like, okay, like I gotta give this to you guys to basically fix what happens in the future. Like, this is obviously like meant to be. So it was cool that she got to come back. Obviously she died in the Doctor Strange's movie. There was a lot of cameos in this film, and like you had the Stan Lee back in the 70s where Tony and Steve were, but I mean a lot of just like other characters too, like different, whether they be like really small cameos or like in the Ancient One's case, like they had like like a full like scene basically. So it was really cool just to get to see all those different characters come back for this film, and just the guest list is super impressive. All right, guys, so now we are officially entering into Act 3, and it's at this point that, the Avengers now, they eventually get all the Infinity Stones back together, and, we get to see Tony putting together, making a new Infinity Gauntlet, which is something that, looking back like on it, like kind of doesn't work a little bit to me, just because like they made a big deal out of forging like the gauntlet and like Infinity War, and like how it had to be forged like through like the power of like a star and all this stuff. And granted, like I know Tony is like super smart and everything, and with all this like different technology and stuff like that, but I was a little surprised that the stones were able to be harnessed on one of his like gloves. But like, just a really small nitpick, like definitely not something that I'm like that like ruins like that part of the movie for me. So, but then they're trying to figure out who's going to be able to wield the Infinity Gauntlet out of all of them. First, like Thor offers it. He says he's the strongest Avenger, so he'll go ahead and do it. But then Professor Hulk, he says that he's the only one that can do it. How it basically almost destroyed Thanos, that he's the only one that would be able to withstand that, that power. So, he ends up putting it on, which is, really another like really cool moment. And he, Tony tells him basically to make sure to keep, don't change, just make sure to bring those people back. Don't change like anything else. And so he snaps his fingers, but before he does, we see the old Nebula who had snuck into the past, or who had snuck into the future and left like the old Nebula, or the future Nebula in the past. So she ends up going and bringing Thanos, basically the past Thanos, to the future. Gets really confusing here, folks. Brings him to the future, and he gets out just before the snap happens. So, you see the snap, the screen like flashes, and then, you see that Hawkeye, he gets a phone call from his wife, and you also just see like outside, it's kind of brightening up. So you're like, okay, like it worked. And, but in this shot, they just like, such a cool sequence, cool, shot. Then you see, I think it's like Hulk or someone like, I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're looking outside, and then all of a sudden you just see the shots coming down from Thanos' ship, and he destroys the Avengers facility. And it's at this point that shit is really starting to go down. So the Avengers, the place is completely destroyed. They're trying to regroup, figure out like, what's going on. Obviously, they end up finding out that, Thanos is there, and, you get this really cool scene where Thor is sitting outside, and he's looking at Thanos, who's just sitting there waiting. And then like Iron Man and Captain America, they come out, and that's when we end up getting our first epic battle. And so it's, it's those three versus Thanos, and he doesn't have the Infinity Stones or anything like that. But trust me, that does not make him any less formidable. He's still a badass in this movie, at least like past Thanos is. And first, Thor, he ends up calling on, the lightning, and he turns into like this almost like Viking kind of like, he has this like weird like braided beard and everything, and he looks like a badass. And they do a good job of like filming him, so you don't really see like his gut anymore. So good like kind of framing up of like the shots like there, and we get the first epic battle. So these guys start going at it. Thanos has his like sword knife like thing, and he's taking on all three of these guys at the same time, and he's definitely giving it to him. And at one point he starts, he's beating the shit out of Thor, and I never thought that Thor was going to die, but like at a point, he has like, Stormbreaker to his chest, and it looks like he's going to push it through. And then this was probably one of the second maybe biggest reaction of the film. You end up seeing, Thor's hammer's on the ground, and it's shaking, and all of a sudden, it flies through the air, and Captain America gets to wield it, and you just see Thor's face, and he's like, I knew it. And man, at that point in the theater, like those opening night guys, I'm getting chills actually right now talking about this. When Captain America had that, and the hammer in his hands, the crowd that I was with went absolutely nuts. There was people that screamed when that happened, and Cap just really, he gives it to him. He starts like fucking throwing lightning at him and hitting with the hammer, hitting him with the shield. And it's just like, oh my God, like what is going on right now? Is this like really happening? So that was nuts. But then even though he gets some good shots on him, Thanos, he starts fighting back, and he starts wailing on Captain America. And then for a second there, I'm like, okay, like this is gonna be it. Like this is where Captain America's gonna die, because I thought that he was gonna die in this film. And you see he breaks like the shield, and he's on the ground. And he basically, then you see Thanos, and he's talking about he's gonna wipe out the planet this time. Like he's just gonna get rid of everything, because he doesn't want anyone to basically try and come back and reverse this, what happened. And at that point you see his whole friggin' army comes out of like the ship, and you're just like, there's no way, even if it was like those three characters, no way they're gonna be able to take on all of that. So yeah, I was kind of expecting Captain America to like die in battle, and I'm sure the rest of the theater was too. But at that point, we got the greatest scene in the film for me by far, and I think a lot of people probably agree with as well. All of a sudden, you hear Captain America in his ear. You hear Sam Wilson. He's like, "Oh, like look to your left," and at this point, you start seeing all the portals from like Doctor Strange and stuff all opening up, and everybody comes back. Black Panther, the Guardians, Valkyrie, Scarlet Witch. Everybody, all the Avengers end up showing up there. Spider-Man, and it was just absolutely insane. The crowd was like, "What is going on right now?" And I remember I actually that was like, it was a happy moment, but I got emotional and started crying. I was like, I can't believe like what I'm seeing right now. That scene, like I don't know if that like you'll ever be able to like replicate that, unless they do something in the future with like the X-Men and like that stuff. But holy shit, like fucking nerd like orgasm like there or whatever, crazy stuff. So it was just so cool. And then Captain America, he says the lines, Avengers Assemble. And you just get this epic battle between like the two armies. And that was by far, like I said, by far my favorite scene in the film. Just like that shot. I wish, hopefully at some point, like, there'll be like a shot. I want to just get that like framed of that like battle with just like everybody there. Absolutely insane. I can't imagine like what it took to the work it took to put to getting that that shot and that scene together. So after all this time, 22 Marvel films, we get something like that. The build up, it was totally worth that, and they definitely paid it off. During that scene too, just to name like some of the things that were awesome, you get to see Pepper Potts and Tony fighting side by side. You also you get to see Spider-Man, and he uses the instant kill thing from like the Spider-Man movie where he used it before, and he's like, why would you use this, or why would you have this on here? He uses that. Valkyrie has a cool scene where she's riding her Pegasus and goes down and just like cuts the side of like one of the aliens or whatever. That was badass. And then Scarlet Witch, she almost like single-handedly defeats Thanos by herself, and I know she can. She's like one of the most like powerful characters as far as like I know. And she's like ripping off all his armor and everything, and then at that point Thanos is like, yeah, shit, like I'm in trouble, and tells like the ship to like fire down, so that way it can kind of distract her. And then at that point we end up getting Captain Marvel comes back into the scene and destroys the ship. I liked how they used her. She wasn't in the film a lot, and they used her kind of like in big moments. So I thought her use of character was good in this film. So while you had a lot of crazy stuff going on in this final battle scene too, you also had some pretty emotional moments that I forgot to mention. That at one point you get the a couple big reunions. So you get the reunion of the first thing that really got me, and I know a lot of other people too, was Tony and Peter Parker, them first getting to see each other, and he's like, oh, like, yeah, we were on that planet, and Doctor Strange, and da-da-da-da-da, and just like, oh, it's really nice to see you, and, he just hugs him, and, yeah, just started crying there, and then right after that, you got the reunion of Star-Lord and Gamora, even though it wasn't, it's not his Gamora, it's the Gamora from like the past that hadn't met him yet. But still, like me being like a big like Guardians fan, like a big fan of those two characters. I started, I was crying from the previous reunion, and then I just kept going right there. But it was funny that she ended up kneeing him in the balls, because she's like, who is this guy? Like, I don't know you. You also have at one moment, they're trying to like get like the Infinity Gauntlet over to like a certain point, and you have like Spider-Man's like laying on the ground or whatever, and you have Captain America, and she comes over, Captain Marvel, and she comes over, and she's like, I think you got something for me, Peter Parker. And he gives it to her, and he's like, yeah, but I don't know how you're gonna get through all of this. But then you get to see like all of the different female characters kind of come together, and they're like, don't worry, she's got some help. And you definitely know what they were going for there. But I thought that was like a pretty cool moment. And so basically they're trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet over to like that other side. I believe it's like at this point too, if not, it's like somewhere around here, that Tony, he looks over at Doctor Strange, and he's like, please tell me, this is the one time that you were talking about. And Doctor Strange says something along the lines of, if I tell you, it's not going to happen. And, especially looking back on that after I watched the film, and especially like that second time, it's like, man, that is really messed up, because he didn't want to tell Tony, because he didn't know if he was going to be able to do what had to be done in order for them to win. And what that is, as you guys know, he ends up, eventually, they're, trying to get like the Infinity Gauntlet away from Thanos. He's fighting like Captain Marvel at one point. He ends up like punching her with like the Power Stone. She, flings away, and he's about to get the gauntlet. And then Tony comes over and steals that thing like really smoothly. Like it was, even the second time watching it, it's like you couldn't even like tell. But Thanos goes to snap, and it just clinks, and he looks, and the stones are missing, and then you see Tony, and he has it on his hand. And Thanos had just said like, I'm inevitable, as he had said a couple times throughout the film, which was a cool line. And then you look over at Tony, and he goes to snap his fingers, and he says, I am Iron Man, which is, referencing the very first Iron Man film. So really cool, just tying back to that original film. He snaps and, gets rid of Thanos' army, as well as Thanos end up getting dusted himself, which I was kind of surprised. I mean, technically they could probably, bring him back like at some point, because I didn't think that they were going to get like rid of Thanos like permanently. So we'll see what happens with that. But then at this point, what happens with Tony. Obviously, his body couldn't handle the snap, and I saw it like almost right away. You start seeing like the black forming on the side of his face, and he's all burnt up, and he's dying. And man, yeah, again, like just started really crying like at this point, because it's like, this is the guy that pretty much like started it all for the Avengers. And he's sitting there, Peter Parker comes over and is he's talking to him, and you can tell that Tony's not really like all there, and just such a sad, very impactful moment. Then you have Pepper Potts, she's over there, she's talking to him, and she says something like, you can rest now. And which, man, getting like emotional just like thinking about it. But she says, you can rest now, which is referencing, earlier in the film when she was talking about like, would he be able to rest if he didn't help, with this. So such a, super emotional moment. You could hear literally everyone in the theater, everyone sniveling and, crying. And oh man, that definitely got me quite a bit. So they end up having, like the funeral for him. It's cool, you get to see all the different like families, all the Avengers and stuff are there. And that's, just was like a really, touching scene overall. And then, once that wraps up, then it's time they have to, return the Infinity Stones. And at this point, Caps, he's like, oh, like I'll go ahead and do that. And I didn't really think of, nothing clicked in my mind like at that time, but so they send him back in time, and they're like, all right, he's going to come back in 5, 4, 3, and they do it, and he doesn't show up. and they're like, okay, like what the hell is like going on? But then you see Bucky, and he's like, look, and over by the park bench, you know, Captain America, you know, Steve, he's sitting over there, but you know, Sam ends up going over and talking to him, and he's an old man now. So, you know, obviously he made the choice. He went back in time and he chose to live out his life. And you end up seeing he has a ring on his finger, and ends up, you know, living and got to live out his life with Peggy Carter, which that was really cool. You know, you get to see them dancing. So it was a really touching moment. So he didn't end up dying, but he is like an old man at this point. And then, you know, he's talking to Sam, and he explains that, you know, he has the shield, and he, you know, basically ends up giving the mantle over to him, which was interesting, because I did think that they were going to give it to Bucky, but then when you think about it, like with everything that Bucky had kind of did, you know, he's kind of like a terrorist, so couldn't really do that. But I from what I heard, because I didn't realize that Sam does end up becoming like Captain America at one point in the comics too, so that totally makes sense. And I thought that was a cool moment. It'll be interesting too, because he doesn't have like superpowers, kind of like, you know, like they did. So that was a cool scene. But yeah, I mean, Avengers Endgame, 22 films in the making, you know, 10 plus years that these films have, you know, taken to come out. And I thought that they did, you know, overall they did a fantastic job with this film. I had so much fun. You know, it was a roller coaster ride of emotions. Everyone that, you know, I saw it, you know, with opening night, everyone was talking about it afterwards. I've seen it twice now. I'm actually going to see it a third time again, and I know a bunch of people, a bunch of my friends, they've either seen it a second time, going to see it a second time, seeing it, you know, again and again. So it's going to be interesting to see if it can beat that, you know, the Avatar's box office. So, but yeah, as far as the rating goes, I believe, yeah, my non-spoiler review, I gave it like a 9.5. It's pretty much almost perfect for me. You know, it covered a lot of ground, and, you know, it had that 3-hour runtime, but I thought they used it well. And I highly recommend it, especially if you're a big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Definitely check this out, obviously. But even if you're not like a big fan and you've seen like some of the films, I think you'll still find enjoyment out of this as well. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. You know, with this, since it is a spoiler review, you know, feel free to put whatever you want down there. And, you know, what is your rating for the film? And yeah, if you guys are new to the channel, make sure, as always, you know, hit that subscribe button, and hit the bell button as well, so that way you will be notified of any of my, you know, my new videos. And as always, make sure to check back for more Pop Culture with Pat.